In today's video we are looking at the history of the periodic table, and we're going to look at the contribution of a couple of key scientists who contributed to this periodic table looking as it does today. Now, a good starting point is the early 1800s, and remember, by 1800s we mean the 19th century. We have less than 40 elements that had been discovered. There were new ones being discovered regularly, around about one every year or so. Scientists started noticing patterns in the way they reacted, in other words their properties, and they started working out properties such as the atomic weight. Now, we don't call it atomic weight these days, but they called it atomic weight. We actually refer to that now as the atomic mass. Now, one of the first people who was able to publish a version of the periodic table was somebody called John Newlands, and he was an English scientist. Element missing there. He was an English scientist who arranged the table a bit like this, and the way he did it was, firstly, he put them in order of atomic mass because they knew the atomic mass. They called it atomic weight, but he put them in order of atomic mass, and he used what he called the law of octaves, and that is because he noticed similarities in the properties of every eighth element. So if you look at this column here, we've got hydrogen, fluorine and chlorine. He noticed that there were similar properties in the elements in that column there, similar with lithium, sodium and potassium, and so on. Now, this was a reasonable way of arranging the elements, but there were a few problems. The first thing is that some groups have a mixture of metals and non-metals. So if we look at this group over here, we've got oxygen, sulfur and iron iron, as we know, is a metal. Sulfur and oxygen are both non-metals, and while he's put those in those groups, they don't actually seem to fit together using his idea of similarities of every eighth element. It only really worked for the first few elements up to around about calcium, and he really didn't take into account this idea that elements were still being discovered. But this was an early version of the periodic table, and while some didn't like it, it was probably the best in terms of what they had to date. The next scientist to come along was somebody called Dmitry Mendeleev, and he was a Russian scientist, and he arranged the periodic table slightly differently. You'll notice we've got up to group 7 here. We haven't got group 0, which is the noble gases, which hadn't been discovered yet, but he had something that looked a bit like this. What he did was he arranged the elements in a periodic way, and by periodic we mean in a regularly occurring pattern. The absolutely clever thing that he did, a very ingenious thing that he did, was he left gaps where he thought there were undiscovered elements. He was aware that there were elements being discovered all the time, and so he left gaps in his periodic table. And the reason why he did that was that if he didn't, the elements in the group wouldn't have similar properties to the other elements in that group. And so he didn't just try and squeeze them in like John Newlands did. He took into account that there might be elements that they hadn't found yet. Not only did he do that, but he did something else which was very clever. He predicted the atomic masses and the properties of those undiscovered elements, and this lent a lot of weight to his argument, to his design of the periodic table, because when those elements were found, it was found that they actually did have properties very similar to what he predicted, and in terms of atomic mass, they had atomic masses that were very close to what he predicted as well. So this is really a breakthrough in terms of how the periodic table was developed. It's not as it looks today, because there were discoveries that happened afterwards, and this made the periodic table change a little bit more over time. But these are the two key people that contributed to the periodic table as it looks today.